Thank you. It is good to be here. When Julie had talked to me first, I believe, here, and she wanted me to come and tell you a little bit about our museum that we are getting together in Nebraska. So I'll share just maybe 5 minutes of that, but I want to kind of focus on giving you guys some supernatural selection, which you may go, what's supernatural selection? Well, I don't know if you've ever seen these little scarecrows or not, but bottom line is, what would you say if all of a sudden I could give some personality to this little scarecrow? Maybe give it life in some way, shape, or form. If I told it to maybe rise up, just kind of rise, awake, and this thing would start to awake like that, you might give it some sort of personification. Some people might say that something like that could be worshipped even. Okay, not me. But that's the kind of thing that happens when you give inanimate objects power that doesn't belong to them. Okay? Now, again, this is just a trick. I mean, there's, rise up. There's no strings or anything like that here. It's just a scarecrow that's alive. Okay, that's all it is. Sweep. Now, what I'm going to show you tonight is that, as I said, when you give inanimate objects things that don't belong to them, it confuses people. And this is where I believe in the Bible times even that Satan used powerful trickery in order to deceive people, in order to worship. I think that this is going to become more clear as we go tonight why I showed you this, but I just want you to keep that little image in your mind. Now, tonight, we want to talk a little bit, as I said, supernatural selection. I'm sure most of you have heard about natural selection, right? I mean, that one's been pretty much thrown out there all the time to where we know that natural selection is how evolution happens. At least that's how the textbooks taught it. When in fact, natural selection, there was nothing wrong with that to begin with. It never really did support evolution at all. It was simply God's quality control. But what I'm going to show you is that natural selection has become an idol. It has been given forces, it has been given personality, it has been given powers that do not belong to it. And when that happens, worship just tends to follow. And I believe that natural selection is an idol that has been worshipped and set up even in churches today. And it is time to knock that off of its little pedestal. And I think you're going to see, by the time we're done tonight, natural selection as taught by evolutionists is an absolute bust. Instead, what we are seeing is something supernatural that is selecting. Not natural or nature selecting, but God selecting. And that is why we see what we see in the fossil record. That's why we see what we see today. That's why all these so-called evidences of evolution have been touted out there as some great thing, and they were wrong. Now, I want to give credit where credit is due here. This is something that Randy Galuza, I think, is probably leading in this research right now. And it basically is coming from epigenetics. Epigenetics is basically, it's studying genetics, genes, DNA, all of that, except for on a very micro scale, we're seeing things that it's like a light switch. And, well, I'm going to explain that as we go along here a little bit more. But the Bible tells us that we are not to have any other gods before the Lord Jesus Christ, before Yahweh. And natural selection, as I said, has been put before and in place of God, even in many churches today. You will understand as we go through. I'm sure you've heard about the blind cavefish. Most of you have. You've probably heard in a debate or something in your textbooks because it's used again to support evolution. And the idea is that if you take a fish and you stick it out of the light and it's been forced to live in these dark caves where there's no light, they lose their eyes, they become blind, they become very white because of lack of pigmentation, all of that kind of thing. So here's a blind cavefish here. Well, that they will say evolution because natural selection took place. It didn't use its eyes, it lost its eyes. Well, I'm sorry. Actually, that's not true. It isn't you don't use it, you lose it. I remember being told when I was in high school that by the time, another million years or so, we won't have a pinky anymore because, we don't really need the pinky. This idea of the vestigial organs, that we have all these organs that developed when you needed it to evolve, but now you don't need it anymore, so you lost it. And like the appendix, it was an evolutionary leftover, so hey, let's just take it out. And now we've discovered, because of science, that you get rid of your appendix, it increases your chances of leukemia, Hodgkin's disease, cancer of the colon, cancer of the ovaries. It actually is very important. It has a purpose, as does every so-called useless organ by evolutionary biologists. They were wrong. They have a purpose. Well, the Institute for Creation Research, Randy Galuza, and some of the staff there have taken some of these blind cavefish. Here you can see some more of them. And they thought, what would happen if you put them back in their natural, or I should say, a natural environment, in the sun? Well, this here is a blind cavefish. This is kind of what a fish looks like. Here's kind of the so-called evolution of it. We've had these pictures for millions of years in order to get this for you, okay? No, actually what you're seeing here is that they're discovering that this change takes place very rapidly. This fish right here is the same fish as this one right here after 30 days of being in the sun. Just in 30 days, we see the pigmentation coming back. The eyes didn't come back in 30 days or anything, but you're seeing a rapid change. Nothing that took millions of years, but what we're seeing is that this whole process of change is reversible. Now, wait a minute. Reversible? That does not sound like a term or a word that should be applied to the term of evolution that we grew up with. Because, accidents, mutations, you don't reverse those. So already there's a problem. And what you're going to see is that these changes we're seeing in nature are not only sometimes reversible, but they're repeatable, they're predictable. None of those words go with the definition of evolution. Accidents, mutations, by chance. That's something that you might see in something that would go along with words like design, purpose, engineered. Again, here's a regular fish, and there is their fish after 30 days. So it's coming back. You might have heard about Darwin's finches, and they get big beaks and little beaks, which is no big deal. So do you. You've got big beaks and little beaks. That's not evolution. Well, we were told that that was evolution. But now, in recent years, we've been studying these, and we can find out that these finches will go back and forth from big beaks to little beaks, depending on the food that they're eating, whether it be people food or just, nuts and berries and the things out there in nature. And, it only takes 2 generations to go a complete cycle. 2 generations, not millions of years. Not because of accidents and mutations, but of some sort of programmed information within that finch that is reacting to the environment around it and its beak begins to change immediately according to the environment. That's not an accident. That's not a mutation. That's not random chance. That's design, purposeful, and it is genetic. Look at here. Every article that I'm going to show you here tonight is coming from an evolutionary perspective. It is not by a creationist. This is right out of their mouths. Here, growing evidence suggests that the epigenetic mechanisms may also be involved in rapid adaptations to new environments. Now tell me how rapid adaptations to environments, how that fits the definition of evolution you ever grew up with. Doesn't, does it? No, mistakes, mutations, just enough of them, it changes. Now, here's the thing that I really appreciate about Randy Galuza is he's saying this: creationists have been wrong. We've been wrong, and we have been. For years, what we have been teaching is we've taken the same narrative that the evolutionists have given us and said, hey, look, you know, there's mutations, and enough mutations, you get all these changes that take place, and then you get evolution. And we said, yes, we understand mutations, but it only goes so far. We believe in micro evolution, micro changes. And they say, yeah, but enough micro changes make big, grand changes. And we're, no. You see, we use their narrative, we just applied stipulations to their narrative. But let me tell you what we really were doing. We took all the power of God, we stripped him of his purpose, we stripped him of his omnipotence, we stripped him of his power, we stripped him of his knowledge, his omniscience, and we gave all credit to the curse. We said, when Adam and Eve sinned, the curse came into the world, and as a result of the curse, we get all these mutations that happen, and we get this variety. So it was kind of an accident and little mutations that sneak by, but again, with limits. But not because of an all-powerful, all-knowing God with purpose designing things, but rather that blind watchmaker. Basically, here's a watch, now let it run its course, right? God is no longer involved. He's just watching the curse do its thing. Let me tell you, that is not what's going on. We're going to put God back on his throne. And we are not going to buy into that narrative of evolution anymore, because I think this absolutely destroys evolution. And if you can truly believe in evolution after hearing this, then you are so biased, it doesn't matter what kind of evidence there is, you won't believe it. Because you're going to believe your religion regardless of the support. You see, you probably heard the story of the moths, right? The peppered moths, where, as the story went in my textbook, that evolution occurred because you see, you got these dark moths and the light moths. Well, before the Industrial Revolution, the tree bark was a little lighter color, and so those lighter moths blended in really well. And the darker ones, they stuck out like a sore thumb, so the birds would come out and eat up the darker moths. So that meant there were very few dark ones and a lot of light ones. But then the Industrial Revolution came, and what ended up happening is that those birds now would eat the lighter ones, because the darker trees from the soot being burned caused the lighter ones to stick out like a sore thumb. And it reversed. Well, first of all, if that was all it was, what's the problem with that? There isn't a problem with that. Yeah, I mean, nothing changed. I mean, it didn't mean that the lighter ones turned into birds or the darker ones turned into birds. It just meant one was going to go extinct. Right? Just like many other things do. There's no problem with that. The problem that I had with it was, first of all, it never happened. Those were dead moths glued on trees in order to take the pictures that you saw in your textbook. In order to get some narrative to try and sell to our children about believing in evolution. Okay, so despite the fact that it was a lie, what we're seeing now because of epigenetics is this. It had nothing to do with birds, which, by the way, the birds, when the moths are out flying around at night, the birds aren't feeding, right? It had nothing to do with that. But what we're seeing is this, is that there is actually what we call mobile DNA. It used to be thought that our DNA was static, that here's your gene set, that's what you get, that's what you are. And we're discovering that is not the case. I'm sure you've heard of gene splicing, where you can take a piece of that strand of DNA and splice it and actually move it to another section, or remove it completely and put in a different one. It's just gene splicing. But you see, it's not just happening in labs, it's happening in the bodies of animals all the time, in reaction to the environment around them. And so they're discovering there's a mobile DNA, and that the black moths have the exact same 20,000 mobile DNA insertions in the same place in the gene as the other ones. In other words, that it's how the gene is going to be expressed by the information on that gene. When we talk about epigenetics, it's like a light switch. You probably heard of junk DNA. They said, oh, you know, we have so much junk, 80% junk DNA. Well, now they're realizing it's not junk. It had a purpose. We still haven't figured out what all of it's for, but they're discovering that the information in your genes is useful. And what they thought was junk sometimes is just turned off. And sometime in your lifetime can be turned on. We'll talk more about this in a moment. But the point is that all of it's important, and so you can have that expression of pigmentation turned on or turned off in that same moth. Okay? Here in Minnesota, you guys are very familiar with the northern pike. You know that in the lakes here in Minnesota, the northern pike, you know, they'll eat just about anything. They'll eat a perch, they'll eat carp, they'll eat sunfish, bluegill, whatever, right? Well, if that northern in a lake eats a bluegill or a perch, nothing happens. But if it eats one of these Cretan carps, when it goes inside the stomach of the northern, it digests it and then it excretes that out. So there's a little bit of, you know, Cretan carp enzymes and whatnot. The scent of that goes back out into the water. The rest of the Cretan carp go, that smells like Bob. And they realize that their cousin has been eaten. And do you know that they will change body shape within 24 hours? Not millions of years, but it will turn from this to that in 24 hours. It gets this hump on its back, making it harder to swallow. It actually makes it more streamlined, and it's faster in swimming. And it changes in 24 hours. Now, how, pray tell me, how does that fit in evolution? That is not evolution. This is a programmed response to an environment that's dangerous. They're like, whoa, somebody's eating us. We need to change. We need to adapt. And so as a result, there's a change that takes place. Now, by the way, they're not thinking that either. There's something inside them that's programming them to do this. Programming, designing, engineering, not accidents, mutations, you know, freak accidents. Completely different. Evolution has been built upon accidents and mutations. And what we're finding is that is not what we're seeing at all. Not at all. How about the reef racefish here? This is the male on the bottom. Now the male will stay in a school of about 10 to 15 females that you can see, the yellow one there. Now the fascinating thing is, if a fisherman comes along and he catches this male on his hook and brings it up, the females all of a sudden realize that the male is gone. And so those males will, now that the male's gone, the females, the largest female only in that group of 10 to 15 females, within 24 hours again, begins to grow testes and is going to replace that male. 24 hours. It's not evolution. Another pre-programmed response to an environment. And this is what we're seeing all over the place. Everywhere we're looking, epigenetics, where things can be turned off or turned on. Mice. Did some interesting studies with mice. You guys have probably heard, you are what you eat, right? There's more truth to that than you realize. You might think, hey, I love ho-hos and ding-dongs, and so I'm going to eat a lot of ho-hos and ding-dongs, and it won't matter because, hey, if I want to get fat, I can get fat. It doesn't bother me, and it doesn't affect anybody else. Not true. Do you know that what you eat may affect your children and your grandchildren? It truly does. What happens, and they're discovering this, is that when you're eating a certain kind of food that's not good for you, and a lot of it, it's almost like God, when He said that we were to stay away from gluttony, was warning us of something. Those food laws in the Bible, maybe God had a reason for them after all. You just weren't smart enough to know what He was talking about. Because when you eat nothing but ho-hos and ding-dongs, your body is saying, this is too much. This is too much of the fat or whatever it is. And so, like a light switch, there is a marker that will be placed on your genes. And that marker then can be passed on to your grandkids or your children so that they have that marker so that they may have a propensity towards diabetes. Because you couldn't control your appetite. That's what they're discovering. As a matter of fact, these mice, it's passed on even through the sperm. What they did is they did an experiment. They took the scent of cherry blossom and they put these mice on an a little pad. And every time the mice were introduced to the scent of cherry blossom, they zapped the mice. Kind of like, I don't know if you remember, when I was a kid, I'd go to Paul Bunyan and I'd get the chicken dancing. Remember that? Where there would be a chicken in a box, you'd put a quarter in, and the chicken would start dancing. Why? Because you turned on the heater on the floor that it was standing on, and so it would start to dance. Okay, they don't do that anymore. All right? But that's what they were doing here. Introduce the scent of cherry blossom, zap them. Well, you know what? These males did not like the scent of cherry blossom. So they took them away and they mated them out. They took them out of their cage and they mated them with naive females. Now, don't get mad. That's just what it's called, okay? The females who had never been introduced to cherry blossom, had never had this experience. They mated with them. Okay, the females then had babies. They took the babies out. They sacrificed the babies to look at their brains, and they saw that the olfactory nerves in every single one of them was much larger in that area for cherry blossom, so that they had a propensity against the scent of cherry blossom. The children who had never been zapped, but this information was passed on to the babies, to the children, through the sperm of the fathers. One generation and a complete different change in them. And again, I'm telling you, this is everywhere in scientific articles. We're seeing this stuff everywhere. From plants reacting, to the environment, like a snail. They can scent from the snail trail. When it comes, tomatoes will respond to basically, they can do a number of different things. Invite other insects in to eat the snails, or to develop a certain enzyme or whatever that makes it to be able to be harder to survive against that snail. All kinds of things can happen. And everywhere we're looking, we're seeing this. It's much like a car. You see, when evolution produced a car, by accidents, What GM and Ford and all these companies did is they just threw things together and they hoped that something would stick. And they kept doing it. And they thought, oh, I like that. You know, four wheels look better than three, so let's keep the four wheels. And they just, you know, over billions and billions of tries until they got things to work right? No, instead there were engineers who used intelligence to program information into these vehicles. What they did is they thought about problems that could arise. And then they thought about solutions to those problems. See, when you engineer something, you can tell when something has been engineered, when it's been designed. Here you see that oftentimes a car will have a sensor. And then it has something like logic, which basically understands or reads the information that is being sensed. And then it will have a response to the logic or to the problem. For example, in most cars today, you'll have a sensor to tell you what the temperature is inside and outside your car. You might have your temperature set at 70 degrees in your car. But that sensor senses, hey, it is actually 85 degrees inside this car. So the sensor does that. There's logic then to say, hey, too hot. And then there's a solution programmed into it to turn on the air conditioning and get it back down to 70 degrees. Very simple. Okay, a sensor, logic, and an outcome. Programmed response. It is no different than somebody who engineered you or any living thing that we see today. God has put sensors in us to sense the environment around it. Randy Galuza and ICR, they call this continuous environmental tracking. That our bodies, every animal, is constantly tracking and monitoring the environment around it. And when it senses something that is not optimal, it recognizes that, there's logic, and then it will produce a response or a solution to that problem. Let me give you some other examples here. This guy here, he says, no clue of how life began by only natural processes. Really, it seems like we've been saying that for a while. And they still have no clue how natural accidents can produce something that is so well designed. That's because you're right. It can't by natural processes. It is impossible. This guy here, he's one of the leading researchers on lizards. All right? He says, in recent years, scientists have identified convergence in almost any type of trait you might imagine. What happened is this. You see, long-legged lizards, if you take lizards in a forest, go look at them, they have longer legs than lizards that live in the brushy areas. You know, the sand and you know, little short, stubby, shrubby brush. They've got short legs. Well, it just so happened that there was a hurricane that came and wiped out all of the lizards on 7 different islands. So what these guys did is they thought, let's repopulate these islands with lizards from the forests. So they took these longer-legged lizards and populated those islands so that they would come back. Well, guess what? Do you think they stayed long-legged lizards? They did not. Because now these had been wiped out. It was not a forest environment. It was a shrubby, short, brushy environment. And do you know, in 4 years is all it took. Our prediction was that they would evolve shorter legs. See, that's not how evolution works. They did. Over the course of 4 years, average limb length steadily declined at all 7 islands, exactly as predicted. All 7 islands were evolving in lockstep. They're so close. What I want you to see here is that they know they have been defeated. But rather than saying evolution is wrong, they are changing absolute and a complete different thing. The definition of what evolution is. They can't say design. They can't say God. They can't, you know, they'll say words that only designers use, like programmed or, you know, well, you'll see some things coming up here. But this is not evolution. It doesn't fit the definition of evolution in any way you've ever learned. So they're cheating. Rather than admitting defeat, we're just going to change what evolution is. It's design. Well, who's designing it? Nothing new. Nature designs. Nature selects. Nature favors. Nature punishes. Nature is given a personification and powers that do not belong to it. And nature has been worshipped and is being worshipped in place of God, as you are going to see even more. These are words that you're seeing them everywhere in scientific journals now. Things like regulated. Wait a minute, that's not evolution. But these are evolutionary articles. Rapid, repeatable, reversible, targeted, predictable. The question is it nature producing this, or is it some other outside source that's producing programmed, regulated, predictable, reversible, all these kind of things? Again, NASA. What NASA did when they were making the space shuttle, did they just put it together and say, let's hope this works, send it out? No. I mean, I know they were hoping it was going to work, but they spent years planning. And what they were thinking was, all right, what happens if this goes wrong? Well, we have to have a sensor that tells us there's something going wrong. Then we need to have a response to that. And so they would think of every possible, solution to every possible problem that they could think of in order to make that successful. And that's what they did. Do you think it's possible that that's exactly what God has done as well? Just like any other engineer does, they think about possible problems and then program solutions into their creation? Think about this. When did God choose you? Before the creation of the world. I think I talked here maybe once about, I don't remember for sure, but on Adam and Eve and kind of rethinking Adam. And I said, I don't think God was, surprised, like, Adam, no, what were you thinking? Oh, no, you screwed it up. Oh, what am I going to do now? No, God knew that Adam was going to mess up. And he had already provided a solution for that problem. Amen. You see, that's a designer. That's an engineer. That's someone with purpose. And that is exactly what we're going to see. Guinea pigs. Guinea pigs, they carry their important parts low to the ground, if you know what I mean. So what they did is they took these guinea pigs and they put them on a heating pad for 70 days. Cooking their important parts. After 70 days, they did the same thing. They removed them from their environment, introduced them to the naive females, had them mate, and then the offspring were observed. Do you know that those offspring, you might think, well, they went sterile. That would almost be like a mutation or a problem. Instead, there was a pre-programmed response to an environmental problem. It's too hot. So do you know that those offspring had over 18 genes that were modified to allow those young babies, the very next ones from their father, to live in warmer temperatures? The males were sensing an environment that was too warm. So they sent a warning to their children and allowed those children then to be more adaptive to that environment. Amazing. There could be some great research here in just even the predictions. We talk about what weather is supposed to be like and whatnot. Maybe we should be watching nature and seeing what nature is telling us is coming. The possibilities are endless. But anyway, We have other things too, like island dwarfism and things like that. These little elephants here, they're about waist high. That's as big as they get. Because they're on an island. And so their environment kind of determines how big they get. And we might look at that and go, oh, that's so cool. But we see it all the time. You take a fish and you stick it in your little goldfish tank. How big is that goldfish going to get? Not very big in that little goldfish tank, is it? But you take that and put it in a bigger tank, guess what? It now gets bigger. Stick it in an even bigger tank, and it gets even bigger. You see, it will only grow as large as its environment allows it to, and that same fish responds to the environment. Continuous environmental tracking. We see it all the time. Plants. Stick a plant in a pot. How big is it going to get? Depends on how big the pot is, right? I mean, we could go on and on and on. This is what we're seeing everywhere. How about these little beetles? This is kind of cool. This beetle morphs into this. Okay? It changes its shape to look like an ant, because what the beetle does is it eats ants. Well, it goes into a bunch of ants. All the ants attack it, kills the beetle. So what it does is it changes its shape, its smell, its behavior, and it looks like the ant, and then it goes and it will even feed the ants. And when nobody's looking, will eat an ant. So it just figures, it's, what I earned for my pay, I guess. This is incredible. They propose that the beetles are poised for this, change, this mimicry, that this near-clad, wide, pre-adaptive round plan may underlie the repeated ant mimicry. Wait a minute. Pre-adaptive? That's not evolution. You can't use Christian designed, engineered creation terms for evolution, but that's what we're seeing. Evolution doesn't produce pre-adaptations. That's information, that's design. And that's what we're seeing literally everywhere. Okay? Discovery published March 9th in Current Biology provides evidence that evolution has the capacity to repeat itself. Accidents, mutations, that's not how they work. They're supposed to be random in an astonishingly predictable way. You don't predict random. Okay? Again, design. This lady here in Nebraska, she's one of the leading researchers on mice. Kind of like the lizards, we see that mice, some of them have longer tails or shorter tails depending on the environment that they're in. And so you have, if the mice are living in forested areas, they have longer tails than the mice that live out in the sand hills of Nebraska. So in a similar fashion, they were kind of moving these things into different environments, and what do you think they found? Well, just like on the lizards, from a short-tailed prairie-dwelling ancestor for geographically distant populations across North America, longer tails have evolved, so close, repeatedly in similar forested habitat. Variations in these traits is controlled by separate genetic loci. In other words, information that's pre-programmed, pre-put into that animal, suggesting that it is not a random process. In other words, not evolution. But they can't quite admit that, can they? But implicating similar mechanisms of tail elongation in eastern and western forest populations. Not only that, but you'll even see that the number of vertebrae will change in the tail. I don't know if you remember Discovery Channel not too many years ago was hailing this idea of dinosaurs evolving into birds. And they had some guy going and getting some, eggs from the grocery store and taking them back to their lab, which I thought was hilarious. Those are not fertilized eggs you're buying in the grocery store. But anyway, they bring them back to the lab, and then they have them in an incubator, and they're doing all of these things. And so they begin to look at these, and what they were thinking was this: hey, you know how a chicken has legs? They've got scales on their legs, feathers on their body. They got a little of both. That's because they evolved from a dinosaur. So maybe we could reverse engineer a chicken back into a dinosaur. And so what they were doing is they were doing epigenetics. They would find these Hox genes and whatnot that basically, certain portions that control certain areas of an animal's development. And they were stimulating it with proteins and so on. And in essence, what they were trying to do is take the area that produces the scales on the feet of the chicken and see if they could get it to produce scales on other parts of its body. Because you do know that if you can put scales all over a chicken, you now have a dinosaur. No, you have a cold chicken. Okay? But this is the kind of thinking that they were doing. But you see, the whole idea was they even showed you that they could get different number of vertebrae by stimulating, again, that area of the gene, and it would produce an extra vertebrae. So they were all excited that this is evidence of evolution. No, it wasn't. Not at all. It's evidence of pre-programmed information and God's amazing variety and ability to have things adapt to different environments so that they could survive. If God knew there was going to be a curse on this world, if he knew that things were going to change, he knew that there was going to be a flood, he knew there was going to be an ice age, do you think that you would have to be able to adapt to that? Yes, and do you know that we as humans do adapt to that? In a very small way, we can see this even from winter to summer. I know that in the winter, I keep up my thermostat at about 65 degrees because I'm cheap. Okay? Sometimes 60. But it just depends on how much of the complaining I can take from the rest of my family. Okay? So maybe 65. But you know what? After a couple of weeks, everybody's adapted to it. It's fine. Now, summer comes. I haven't gotten any less cheap. And so now the thermostat goes to 75 to 80. I just want the stupid humidity out of the air. Okay? But do you know if I put that down to 65, the same temperature that I was adapted to before, I am going to be freezing. Because we adapt to the environment and its changes. Eskimos, and do you know that they have kind of more of a stocky, thicker body? Why? Because they have adapted to the colder climates. It's not evolution. That's God saying, you need that. It's his way of allowing you to survive in different environments, to thrive in different environments. You know, I'm sure you've heard ICR, AIG, and other creation organizations talking about, evolution says that this is what evolution looks like. We all started from some tree shrew, and from that tree shrew, goo turned to zoo, turned into you. But that's not what it is. It's more like an orchard. God created original kinds of animals, and from each kind, you get a variety. And those varieties are adaptable. And yes, there can be mutations. I'm not saying there aren't mutations. The curse is real. But let me tell you, the curse isn't what's driving this world. God's loving hand is what's guiding this world, not the curse. Okay? Yes, the curse is real. Yes, he's coming and he's going to take away that curse. But in the meantime, don't give the curse the credit for all these amazing things we're seeing in the animal kingdom. That credit belongs to God and his power, his purpose, his love. Anyway, it's certainly not nature that should be given that power. It's certainly not nature that should be elevated to godhood. And that is exactly what has happened. Evolution has been wrong about literally everything that they have taught you. Literally everything. We talked about the appendix, okay? Their tailbone, all these vestigial organs, gill slits that a baby has. Okay, wrong, they're not gills, they're not slits, they're actually wrinkles that turn into the glands, the jaw, the ear. The junk DNA that they're finding. They told you that you were 98.6% genetically identical to a chimpanzee. Wrong again. Now it's depending on, different things that you're looking at, 50 to 70%. And even at 99%, it was astronomically different, genetically speaking. A difference of 3 nucleotides was fatal. And so you could be 99% identical and still be completely different than anything else. They've always been wrong. Neanderthal, used to be the missing link. Now they say Neanderthal was completely human. As a matter of fact, over 29% of European population has Neanderthal DNA in it. And they're even saying that's higher now. Okay? Neanderthal was completely human. They're wrong about literally everything, yet the Bible has never changed. If you'll just hold on to that. They've been wrong about death. Death is the hero. Steve Jobs, when he was speaking, I think it was at Stanford, he said this: death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. You see, for evolution, death is the hero, right? Let me tell you, if you can just be as unbiased as possible for a moment, you all know death is not a good thing. I mean, when you see that lion biting into this zebra and that zebra fighting for his life, you're not thinking, oh, that's a good thing. I get a kick out of these, polar bear lovers. Or should I say seal haters. Think about it. You got to pick a side. You're either for the polar bear and against the seal, or you're for the seal and against the polar bear, right? Pick a side. One way or another, you're going to look bad. Why? Because you know death is bad. I mean, while you're watching that polar bear chew this seal, to death, and it's still alive, and, guts are coming out of it, and you're like, oh, yeah, way to go, polar bear. Go, polar bears. Right? No, death is not the hero. Death is the result of sin and the curse, and we all know it. And Steve Jobs knows it now too. Never is it the hero. But this is the lie they have to keep touting in order for you to think and believe the lie of evolution. Literally everything they're wrong about. It's interesting. They've also been wrong about this. Many people in the church have been wrong about this. They always complain that, hey, you've got to stop talking about, a young earth creation. If you want to talk about God creating, that's okay. But if you're going to say the earth is young, like the Bible would say, and hold firm to a literal reading of Scripture like that, you're going to be divisive, and people aren't going to come to church, and we're going to lose tithers. So please, let's just, kind of calm down. You're going to lose. Tell you what, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything, right? Isn't there a country song or something that says that? This is exactly what's happening. This is a sociology, again, secular, by the way, from 1990 to 2015, they followed a group of people, some of them here, that believed that the Bible was inspired but figurative. Millions of years is okay. Then the other group of people, they took the Bible literally. It says what it says. And then those that didn't believe the Bible at all, it's just a bunch of fables, made up man stories. And what's amazing is as they followed these people through the years, the numbers began to change to where these inspired but figurative moved more towards believing that the Bible was literal. The people that believed the Bible was literal, their numbers held steady. And the people who didn't believe that the Bible was real at all, their numbers declined because more and more of them began to believe that the Bible was right. In other words, you're going to lose if you're on this camp. You're going to lose if you're in this camp. But if you're in this camp, slow and steady wins the race. So this idea that young earth creation is divisive simply is not true. Well, I mean, it is divisive, but it's not going to... If people would stand, let me tell you, God would bless. It's the same thing, and I'm going to step on toes here with this COVID nonsense that we just went through. Do you know, across the country, I have been, every church that kowtowed and shut their doors are smaller today. When I can't say every, but every one that I have been to, which has been a lot, they're smaller today. Those that stood their ground, they grew. Some of them, in some cases, doubled or tripled in numbers. Okay? But we were too afraid to try to please people rather than stand on truth. It is no different for any truth. Truth matters. Truth is important. And we have to stand for it. Romans 1:22 says this, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal man, humans, okay, birds, animals, and reptiles. Isn't that interesting? They exchanged the glory of the immortal God, His power, His omniscience, and instead they exchanged it for some mortal human being ideas, birds, animals, reptiles, natural selection. And it says, therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. You see, when you exchange the truth for a lie, you begin to worship imagined things, created things. Natural selection is a made-up... Darwin invented this idea, right? For the most part. And God was kicked off and out, and natural selection was put in and on its throne. Look at this, Darwin's great discovery. Darwin's theory of natural selection accounts for the design of organisms and for their wondrous diversity as a result of natural processes, the gradual accumulation of spontaneously arisen variations or mutations sorted out by natural selection. Can you see how natural selection is personified here? Okay, it accounts for design. Nature doesn't design. Nature doesn't have that power. Nature doesn't think. Nature doesn't reason. It responds to environmental changes. And how does it respond? Because there are sensors. And where did those sensors come from? By accidents? Not a chance. Okay? This is, like I said before, natural selection in articles you will see constantly given these personified terms, favoring, punishing, selecting. It can't do any of those things. God can. This lady says Darwin was brilliant to make natural selection a sort of godlike term, an expression that could replace God. Who did it? Created life forms. He made it easy for his contemporaries to think and verbalize Mr. Big Omnipotent God in the sky, picking out those he wants to keep. He has been conceived of as a natural selector. Can you see that switch? God has been conceived as a natural selector. Basically saying natural selection. Nature is God. No. But this is indeed a godlike term. Created. This is nature creates. Nature replaces God. Nature has been personified and given powers that never should have been ascribed to it to begin with. Starting to make a little bit more sense? You might think how silly it would be for somebody to actually worship some stupid little scarecrow. But yet people do it all the time. We worship and serve created things, things of our imagination, rather than the Creator who is forever praised. This guy says biologists now tend to believe profoundly that natural selection is the invisible hand that crafts well-wrought forms. It may be an overstatement to claim that biologists view selection as the sole source of order in biology. Order? That's not a term used for evolution. But not by much. If current biology has central canon, you have now heard it. Guys, this is idol worship. And the church has allowed idol worship into its doors when they even allow this idea of millions of years or any of the narrative of evolution into its doors. I'm going to leave you with this quote here. Hebrews 12:2, it says this, "Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." I love that. I want you to understand something, folks. God saw that there was going to be a problem. And as a result, there was a pre-programmed solution for the problem. The problem was sin, the curse. The pre-programmed solution was Jesus Christ. I love that. He knew that you were going to need Him. And He is the response for the problem. He is the source of the supernatural selection of you. He chose you before the creation of the world. For the joy set before Him, He endured the cross so that you might have salvation. If He did it with the animals and He cared enough about them to make sure that they were going to be safe and be able to survive in a harsh environment, don't you think He would do the same for you, not just physically but spiritually as well? And I'm telling you, that is exactly what Scripture says He has done. As the physical, it's just a picture of what He did in the spiritual for you. He sent His Son to take care of the problem of sin, and all you have to do is believe and stop worshiping some created thing of your own imagination and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and let me tell you, you will be saved. So, if He did it in nature, I think He did it in the spirit world as well. So, with that, we'll open it up to some questions. Maybe before I do, because I know I'll forget, just if you guys are interested in any of my information here, I've got 24 cases of DVDs. I think there's 28 DVDs, because one's got 2, one's got like 4 in it, and so on. We're giving you every one of them for $40. So basically 28 DVDs for $40. The books, you can have one for $10, or you get all 4 of them for $20. And then the hats, if you just want to kind of help support and just promote the Boneyard, those are $25 there. So, but anyway, so that's out of the way. Oh, and if you want to go to Israel with me, I'm leading a tour again in January. I think I got one going in November, but filled up so fast that I had to add a second one here. So if you want, just get in touch with me. Yes.
So this is more in the idle curiosity category, but you mentioned they were able to turn on a genetic sequence to give an extra vertebrae to a chicken. In what situation might a chicken need a single extra vertebrae?
You know, again, I don't know. I can't answer that for sure. What we're seeing, though, is, first of all, keep in mind you can only work with what God put in the genetic code. So you can't turn on the horn gene for the chicken because they don't have it, right? Evolution would like you to think that you can do that. So just kind of a side note to mention on that. I don't know. It's kind of the same thing with mice. Why do they need one in a forest versus sometimes it's just maybe because it allows them to maneuver, to fly, to not fly. I don't know. there's no way for us to, I mean, there are so many things that we can see in design that we say, why does it need that? And we just don't know. Sometimes it's just God's creativity and beauty. You know, you look at a peacock and you think, what's the point of that? I love Darwin's explanation. The point of a peacock's tail was to attract a mate. Hey, girls. Right? 248 mating peacocks were studied in Tokyo, Japan. They found out the male or the female could care less about the male's tail. It's just like in real life. Okay? They don't care. Why does it have it? Because it proclaims the beauty and the power of God. If I drew you a picture that was awful up here and said, here, I drew you this nice picture, and you go, what is it? And I say, it's a cow. And you go, are you sure? Is it upside down? No. You know, which side's the head? Over there. And you're going like, no. I would say I'm a very bad artist. Likewise, if we looked at God's creation and we saw that it didn't function very well, whatever, it would say that God isn't a very good creator. Instead, what we see is not only beauty, but functionality. So much so that we don't even understand that functionality. My presentation on amazing animals will talk about all kinds of things, like even the moth. We are taking things that you probably didn't even know it functioned that well, like a moth antenna can scent in a single atomic particle of scent. And so we've got drones where they will literally take the antenna of a moth, attach it to a drone. I don't understand the technology, it's just what they do. It's in the magazines. And they will use that antenna on the drone to go to find a certain scent out there. Right now, they've only gotten, I think it lasts about 8 or 9 hours is all they can get out of that one antenna before they have to switch it out. But there's design functions and things that we just aren't aware of, and we're discovering constantly more and more all the time. Sometimes it's sensory things. The cats and their whiskers, they sense things with those that you and I just can't relate to. Yeah.
I'm trying to wrap my head around this. I guess I don't understand. I am a creationist, but how would what you're saying that things can change within 24 hours or a month or according to its environment, how would that cause an evolution to say, oh, I can't be an evolutionist?
Be an evolutionist, yeah. I think because what it is, again, evolution has always taught, what's that? Why does this basically prove evolution is wrong, in short? And I think, again, just to kind of repeat the answer being, evolution is built upon chance, random, so it's not repeatable, it shouldn't be predictable, it shouldn't be in any way look like design. And it was built upon mutations, and many mutations over millions of years of time. What we're seeing is design and quick. So adapting, yes. Evolution has hijacked that word adaptation to make it us, we hear the word adaptation, you think, evolution, because they're thinking it adapts over millions of years of time. When in fact, we're seeing, nope, it is extremely fast, and adaptations are God's foreknowledge and a good thing. And we've always agreed with adaptations as creationists. It's just that it has nothing to do with the curse and millions of years and accidents. So, yes?
Well, this is like an extreme, but so what you're saying is like, okay, the fish from the dark and the light and all change, and like the salamander, the short line, like, well, how take an alligator from Florida, bring it up to Minnesota, put it in the winter. What's going to happen to that? Yeah. To adapt to that?
Well, it could. Okay, again, if the changes are too extreme all at once, probably not. But it's just like a saltwater fish and a freshwater fish is an example. You can take a saltwater fish and turn it into a freshwater fish, or a freshwater fish and turn it into a saltwater fish, over a period of slowly making those changes. Because, again, the fish are able to adapt to those things by...
So if you brought it in the fall, and you got to adapt it to the cold, and when it came along,
Yes, yes. I can't give you, every specific answer, will this animal do that or what, but the concept of it is yes, they could adapt within reason.
Right.
Yes.
The muskies would eat them.
The what?
The muskies would eat them.
The muskies would eat them. Okay, yeah. Yes.
So, like, in athleticism, people would say, like, oh, this guy's super genetically gifted. Would you say that is, like, would you agree with that? Or, like, did he really hit the jackpot? Or was the things that he did certain things on?
Great question. So, as an athlete, did he get the gene jackpot? That he can jump, he can run, he can, shoot or whatever. In some cases, you might say yes, but not always. In some cases, again, we kind of hear, oh, that guy got the skinny gene or, whatever. Not necessarily, because I have the gene for skinny and I have the gene for fat. I can be both. It kind of depends on how that light switch is either turned on or turned off. Believe it or not, like my brother is 6'7" or something, another one is 6'4", another one is 6'3", 6'2", my dad was 6'1", and here I am. Okay? The light switch got turned off. Okay? But that gene should be available, to simplify, basically. So I don't want to make this all physical either, because I do believe God has gifted us, that God sometimes gifts people with different abilities and talents. And he does that because he wants you to use them for the kingdom of God as well. And so be careful to make everything just a gene jackpot. While, yes, that's true, and, God's sovereignty is still at work, I don't think that, no matter how much I played basketball and no matter how much I stretched myself out, I'm never going to be 6'2". I won't adapt to that, okay? So it's not like, hey, whatever, go put myself in any environment I want, okay? Can I adapt to a little warmer climate? I can. Will I adapt to 150? Nope. Okay, there's limitations. There's design factors that God has certainly put in us. There are indeed mutations that can happen. And so don't make this a either or, all or nothing kind of thing. This is just another part of the mix of God's creativity, God's design, his foreknowledge, his, loving kindness, and so on. Yes?
I was wondering if the carp, did it reduce down in size? They say in the study, or?
Yes, they can go back. They can go back. So again, reversible, repeatable. These are the terms that they're using.
Once they didn't realize Bob was being eaten anymore, then they went back down to.
Yes, yep. They'll go back to a regular size. I don't remember or know how long it takes, but I know that for a time they do that because the warning is there, and so it's a quick adaptation to the warning. Anything else?
Will the next generation of cavefish have complete eyes?
Will the next generation of cavefish have complete eyes? We don't know yet. This is brand new research on, I think, I would say 2-3 months is all that fish has been out. It has not been very long. So we don't know what's all going to happen. Can the eyes come back? It seems yes, because the genetic information for that eye is there. It has just been switched off. It's much like when somebody will go blind today. What happens is oftentimes in their hearing, it's like there's a switch and their hearing will adapt and they become like super hearers, right? If you become deaf, other senses seem to take over. And so, yes, they can, and the next generation could easily because that information is available. But this is brand new research on the cavefish, so we don't know all of the results of where it's going to go. Okay? All right. Thank you, guys. God bless. Thanks for having me here.